If you've ever taken a drive through the heartland, you've likely noticed something unsettling. Town after town goes by. They were once bustling with life. Now they sit quiet. They're worn. The old factories that once hummed with activity stand empty. The grand homes that housed both company leaders and line workers, they're boarded up. Reminders of a time when communities thrived together. But what if there's a way to bring that America back? Tonight, I'm joined by Spencer Morrison, author of Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream. Morrison believes the decline of our manufacturing base wasn't inevitable. It was a deliberate choice by those who put profits before people, shipping jobs and prosperity overseas. The consequences? A middle class that's struggling, a culture in decline, and a nation where fewer families can afford to buy homes, start families, or even put healthy food on the table. In many communities, despair has led to a rise in addiction and social breakdown. Morrison argues that there's a solution: tariffs. He tackles the myths spread by free traders and so-called conservatives who claim tariffs are harmful. Instead, he makes the case that tariffs are the key to reviving American industry, restoring our communities, and reclaiming the promise of the American dream. If you care about the future of our country and want to see America put first again, you're not going to want to miss this conversation.
This is The Springer Show, the voice of conservative truth. And now, here is your host, Brian Springer.
Thank you. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining me. It's great to have you along for the ride, as always. Tonight, the mainstream media is fixating on the chaos in the LA riots. There's vandalism, destruction of property. It's really important to remember what's really at stake here, though. Across the country, we're seeing protests fueled by those who want to undermine law and order, targeting the very men and women of ICE who are working to keep our communities safe by removing dangerous illegal aliens from our streets. But let's be clear about this. These raids are not about targeting hardworking families. They're about protecting American lives and upholding the rule of law. For too long, open borders and weak leadership have made our country less safe, while decisions made by elites, both in politics and big business, have shipped our jobs overseas and left our towns hollowed out. Tonight, we're going to talk about what it really means to put America first. That's why I'm honored to have Spencer Morrison. He's the author of Reshore, How Tariffs Will Bring Our Jobs Home and Revive the American Dream, and he's going to be joining us. Spencer is a lawyer, sessional instructor of law, independent intellectual with a focus on applied philosophy, empirical history, and practical economics. He's also the editor-in-chief over at nationaleconomicseditorial.com. Spencer understands that tariffs are more than just a trade policy. They're a way to restore American jobs, rebuild our communities, and give hardworking Americans like you and I a real shot at success. So as we watch the turmoil unfold in LA, let's remember, strong borders and a strong economy go hand in hand. Let's talk about how we can stand up for law and order, bring our jobs back, and reclaim the American dream. Welcome, Spencer. It's great to have you here with us.
Brian, it's my pleasure to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Spencer, we're really happy to have you here. But before we dive in, can you just give the folks here a little brief background on yourself and your new book, Reshore, and maybe what inspired you to write it?
Yeah, it's my pleasure. So I've been writing about this topic for the last 10, 11 years. I have a column that I write every week on Blaze Media. I'm a frequent contributor for all sorts of amazing publications, American Greatness, WND. I've been on BBC, just about all the alphabet soup of news channels. And I'll tell you, the reason I wrote this book is because nobody was speaking out in defense of American industry and in defense of the American worker. And we've just been getting pillaged, absolutely pillaged, for the last 50 years. And that's been happening from our foreign trading partners and foreign businesses. And of course, right from the top down, right from Washington, right from New York. The elites orchestrated this whole thing. So what I do in Reshore, the book is divided into 3 parts. The first part of the book, I survey the economic damage, and we look at just how the government is hiding the true inflation rate, how they're hiding the unemployment statistics, and basically how they're hiding the body of a murdered American industry. The second part of the book, we sort of look about, why this is happening. What is the underlying philosophy? What are some of the economic theories that have led to this sort of downfall? And then in the third part of the book, we look about how we can fix America's economy. And go figure, there's a tried and true method that just about every country in the world has been using against America. It's called tariffs. And of course, that's what the American Revolution was all about, was making an independent country that was both politically and economically self-sufficient. So what President Trump is doing right now with the tariffs is not really any different than what George Washington did with the tariffs. He's using them to make America a self-sufficient, independent country again. And that's where we need to go with this. And I think the discussion needs to be framed around self-sufficiency.
That makes a lot of sense, and there has to be some sort of discussion here, because all I've really heard about is debate and not discussion. When most people hear the word tariffs, they think of higher prices at the store. They see, on the news, you've got the places like Walmart and other big box stores saying, well, look, because of tariffs, we're going to raise our prices. And they're putting all the blame on the tariffs. Can you kind of explain in simple terms for people what tariffs actually are and how they work?
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure. So very simply put, a tariff is a tax on imported goods. So if we buy something from China and there's a 10% tariff on that good from China, whatever price we pay to the Chinese manufacturer, it's going to go up by 10%. That's how tariffs work in general. One of the big misconceptions is that if there's a 50% tariff on something, the mainstream media goes crazy and they say, well, the price of the good's going to go up by 50%. Now, obviously, that's not true. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number one, tariffs are paid on the price that we get when we purchase it from the country that we buy it from. So say, for example, we look at the price of toasters. A lot of toasters are made in China, and then we import them through Hong Kong, and then they come to the store and you buy them, from Walmart or Target or wherever you buy toasters from. Let's say that the retail price of a toaster is $60. A 10% tariff on that, the mainstream media, they always say, oh, it's going to go up by 10%. It's going to be $66 for a toaster. That's not the case, though, because the tariff isn't levied on the sticker price. It's not levied on the price that we bought it from the Hong Kong retailer. It's levied on the manufactured price in China, which may be $10. So the tariff price doesn't inflate prices in the same way that like a sales tax would. The second thing that we have to remember is that you can avoid a tariff entirely by simply buying American. And ultimately, that's the whole point of tariffs. What we'd like to do is, rather than buy production from abroad, we want to bring that production home. And the net result of that is you don't pay any tax at all. And the cost of an American-made product, if we're producing sufficient volume, isn't really any different than the cost of a Chinese product. At least it's the consumer price difference is almost imperceptible.
And we could possibly even say that the quality of the product would be improved if we bought it here within the United States.
Yeah, that's exactly it. One of the things we've seen, we'll talk about that, it's invisible inflation. A lot of people don't understand this, but we're not really getting these cheap goods from China. What we're getting are cheaply made goods from China. If you look at the lifetime of a product, say, for example, a household appliance like a washing machine or a dishwasher, when you purchase that product, you expect it to operate without significant repairs or without needing to be replaced for a specific amount of time. Machines that were purchased, say, in the 1970s, 1980s, the lifespan of that product, on average, was about 25 years. You could typically get a 10-year warranty. A lot of products at the time had lifetime warranties. We're talking 20, 30-year life cycles for products.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Yeah. So you buy the product once and you've got it for 30 years. The big difference now is that the sticker prices come down for a lot of products. The problem is that the life cycle for the product is now 5 years. You get an extended warranty. Maybe it's 10 years, but you're not getting a lot more juice out of the product. So over the same product life cycle, what we're seeing now is people are buying the same product 2, 3, even 4 times. And the question becomes, if you look at the quality of the product and you look at the price of the product over a 10, 20-year time horizon, was it cheaper to buy American or was it cheaper to buy Chinese? And I've done the math in the book. And as it turns out, it was cheaper if you just bought the American product because you bought it once and you had it. And right now we're buying the same product 2-3 times. You're paying for the same thing over and over again. So that's how, inflation isn't necessarily just about sticker prices. It's also about product quality.
And I think it's become kind of commonplace where, folks, they expect to pay for a Chinese good from a TV to a washing machine to a refrigerator to any number of things. And they do expect that it's going to last just a couple of years maybe, and then going to have to go purchase another one. Whereas, my grandparents, my parents, they had these things that lasted for years and years and years. They might have paid a little bit more for them, but over time, as you're saying, the cost evens out. I mean, it actually becomes cheaper to pay a little bit more once and have that product for 20, 25 years than to have the same product for 5 or 6 purchases over the same amount of time.
Exactly. And that's how the math works out. So they're not cheap goods. They're cheaply made goods.
You believe that tariffs are going to help bring jobs back to America. Well, how is that different from what we've already been told by free trade advocates that it's not going to work that way?
Well, I think, I'd say 2 things to that. First, the economic logic almost guarantees that there's going to be jobs created. And the reason for that is because what tariffs are going to do is they're going to incentivize domestic production. So right now we have a situation where America's consumption is greater than our production as an economy. The difference between those 2 numbers, what we're consuming and what we're producing, is reflected in this number called the trade deficit. Last year, the trade deficit was $1.2 billion, $1.2 trillion. That means we consumed $1.2 trillion more than we made. The difference was made up by imported products. If we were to impose tariffs, and obviously we're still consuming those goods, which means we have to produce those goods. If we eliminated the trade deficit, which is not going to happen, and it's not necessarily the goal, but it's going to be a byproduct of tariffs, what is that going to do? It's going to increase the domestic production because it's going to have to rise to match our consumption. Because obviously consumption is what drives production, right? If there's a demand for something, people are going to make it. That's how this works.
Right.
So what's going to happen if we eliminated the trade deficit with tariffs? GDP is going to go up by $1.2 trillion. And that's going to create a lot of jobs. In fact, it's probably going to create, if you do the math and you look at how many jobs that we've lost since 2000, we're looking at creating about 5 to 6 million manufacturing jobs. And on top of that, there'll be other service jobs which are created. And the reason that, and they always say, well, the free trade balances us out because we're creating jobs in other industries. That's only true if there's no trade deficit. But there is a trade deficit, so we're not even in that same ballpark right now.
Right. And I've heard some people have talked to me, my limited knowledge of tariffs, and they've said, well, okay, if we put these tariffs in place and this brings back, manufacturing to the United States, that's going to be good. That's going to be good for the economy. It's going to increase jobs. It's going to have money in Americans' pockets. They're going to take that money. They're going to spend it. It's going to stimulate the economy. It'll be good. However, if we're putting these tariffs on these countries and we're going into this trade war that we keep hearing about on the news, and these countries come to the table, they talk, and we lower our tariffs, they lower their tariffs. Why would they want to bring manufacturing here to the United States instead of just leave it over there since we've lowered the tariffs and now we're not having to pay as much tariffs to bring stuff in anymore?
I mean, it's a good point. And I don't agree with that, with that logic. The point of tariffs, in my view, is to reshore our factories and our economic production. The goal is not to relocate the factories from China to, say, India or Cambodia. We want to bring the factories back here. So what that means is that we need high tariffs that are high enough to sort of balance out the price differences between producing in America and producing in a foreign country. And then they have to be stable across the board right? We can't have really high tariffs on China, but no tariffs on a country like India, because that's just going to relocate the production from China to India. So we have to be looking at tariffs strategically as a part of, we have to look at it from the perspective of our national defense, of our social well-being. It goes beyond just economics. And that's what other countries are doing. I mean, you have to understand, just about every country on earth imposes tariffs on American production. And the reason for that is because these other countries have made the calculus that there are things that are valuable to them, such as the ability to produce ships, the ability to produce steel, the ability to produce silicone computer chips. Those have a value inherent in and of themselves, right? It's national security. In addition to that, it's good paying manufacturing jobs. And what these other countries have said is they say, look, we are going to prioritize that. And what has America been prioritizing? We've been prioritizing, these so-called cheap goods, which, as we've seen, were not actually that cheap. But the tariff policy is a balancing act between these sort of competing interests. And America, up until President Trump, has struck a really poor balance where we haven't been prioritizing jobs, we haven't been prioritizing national security, we've been pursuing sort of this almighty dollar at the expense of everything else. And that's left the country weak. It's eroded our social structures, and it's undermining the fundamentals of our economy.
So we've kind of discussed tariffs as far as what they are, how we're using them, what the impact can be. Let's pivot a little bit. In your book, Reshore, you paint kind of a vivid picture of how our small towns and factories have changed over the past few decades. So what happened to them? Whose decision led to this decline within these small towns?
Well, it wasn't any one person's decision. I mean, obviously, there were people who were more important. The Nixon administration, for example, closing the gold window was an important moment, but it wasn't in and of itself pivotal. What we've seen over the last 50 years is sort of a chronic decline in America's industry and our economic institutions, which has led to an erosion of our society and of our economy. I mean, you think about some of the numbers. I'll throw out some numbers for the listeners.
Yeah, sure.
America's run a trade deficit every single year since 1974. The cumulative value of that trade deficit is over $25 trillion when you account for inflation. Wow. $25 trillion has been spent buying goods rather than building them. And that money has been spent in these foreign countries investing in their infrastructure, building their roads and their ports, educating their populations. You look at China, for example. China joined the World Trade Organization in 2001. 2001. Look at the economic growth that China has had since that date. They've averaged over 8% GDP growth per year. They've laid over 140,000 kilometers of rail track. A lot of that is high-speed rail track. They now produce a third of all of the container ships. A third of all the international sort of ocean-going sea vessels are now produced in China. America produces 0.2%. We don't even have a shipping industry anymore. It all comes from China. They produce 23 times as much steel as us. They produce all of our computer chips. We barely even make those anymore. We're relying on China for the advanced computer chips. And this has all happened in the space of 25 years. And it was bought and paid for by American investment because they were able to take that 25 trillion, not all of it, some of it went to Europe and other countries, right? But China, the lion's share went to China. And what they did is they invested that money building up their own country. On top of that, when you have all this revenue, I mean, you think about $25 trillion worth of revenue if you're a business, you can borrow against that. You can accumulate all sorts of robots and automation, human capital, physical capital, to build up your economy and make it efficient. And that's exactly what China has done. America hasn't done that because we didn't have the revenue.
So is our revenue going to China? I mean, the boom that I've seen within my lifetime within their country, that essentially what you're saying has been funded by America and the taxpayers?
That's exactly what's happened. All of that money that funded China should have been funding American businesses. I mean, imagine what would have happened to America if we, over the last 40 years, had invested $25 trillion in our own economy. And if you add on to that for a second, about $2 trillion worth of foreign direct investment, and then add on to that the value of all of the intellectual property that's been stolen. China's stolen $9.9 trillion worth of intellectual property from America in the last 20 years. It's an absolutely absurd amount, and we're not getting any consideration for this. If you took all of that money and you invested it in America, these skyscrapers, these new roads, these high-speed rail networks, they wouldn't have been built in Shanghai. They would have been built here. They would have been built all over, connecting all of the areas that we're manufacturing. I mean, we'd have high-speed rail in Pittsburgh linking up to Washington, D.C. We'd have roads that aren't falling apart, right? We've missed out on almost an entire year's worth of GDP in terms of money we could have invested in ourselves.
Wow, that is amazing. And, over at least the last 40 years, if not longer, I have personally been aware of many factories, many plants closing across the country. And I'm assuming that these all went overseas. And everybody just assumes, well, they're going overseas just because it's cheaper to make it there, or they can pay their workers less money. It sounds like maybe there's a little bit more to it. For somebody who's not a policy expert, such as myself, how has this particular loss of these manufacturing jobs really affected regular people in their communities?
Well, Brian, it's a really great question. I mean, we talk about the economy, it's just dollars and cents, it's numbers, it's boring. It's not really what it's about. I mean, the economy affects every aspect of your daily life. Your income allows you to buy a healthy breakfast versus an unhealthy breakfast. It allows you to send your children to extracurricular activities, to buy a piano for them to learn on versus not. I mean, the economy touches every aspect of our daily lives. And as a result, it's really, really important that we get this mix right. One of the things that, really made America great, especially in the 1900s, is that we had long-run economic growth. There was this promise, and it was a reality, that the next generation lived better than their parents' generation, and even better than their grandparents' generation. Now, that link of progress has been broken, and it broke in the 1970s. The next generation of Americans is living worse than their parents. And in a lot of respects, quite frankly, my generation, the millennial generation, we're a lot worse off than the boomers in a lot of ways. And this is because our purchasing power has been going down, the cost of living has been going up. Houses are astronomically expensive compared to what they once were. And a big part of the reason for that is that we've lost 60,000 factories, we've lost 5 million manufacturing jobs, we've lost 5 to 7 million service jobs that were predicated on those manufacturing jobs. Wages have stagnated since 1973. 10 to 11 million people have left the labor force because there's just no jobs available. This is affecting our ability to raise healthy families, to fund our communities, to build infrastructure. It's a huge, huge economic problem, which has led to a cascade of social problems, including lower birth rates, higher substance abuse rates, frankly, I would imagine, a more corrupt local bureaucracies, welfare fraud, the whole 9 yards. When people are hurting for money and when they don't have a future, people give up on society. And to tie this back to the riots that are going on right now, a lot of the people who are rioting in California, who are rioting in LA, a lot of these people are, what are called NEETs. They're young people who are not in education. They're not working. They're not doing anything because there's no jobs, there's no opportunity available. So what do? They get involved in bizarre political causes, and they cause problems, right? I mean, when you have a young population that doesn't have anything to do, what do? Well, they cause problems.
It's got a lot of cultural and social consequences, like a lot of the examples that you've got in your book. But it's really amazing to see how, the discussion on tariffs can have this domino effect, and you really start diving into how it can affect the economy and how it's affected the economy over the last 40, 50, 60 years and the decline of the economy, and what we need to do in order to bring money, manufacturing jobs, and whatnot back to America and improve the economy. Just to try to clarify for some of my listeners, and myself too, again, I'm not that well versed on tariffs, but are you saying that tariffs is the sole answer to fix this problem?
No, certainly not. Tariffs are not a panacea. They're not a one-size-fits-all solution. That being said, I think they're an 80-20 sort of solution. They follow Pareto's law. What I mean by that is that if we were to institute high and stable tariffs across the board that were high enough to reshore factories back to America, we could have, we could solve a lot of the downstream problems simply by getting people working, putting money in people's pockets. I want to link this back to, law and order again, because we're seeing a lot of that in the news. I mean, this country has got huge problems with, with unruly protesters. And again, part of the reason for that is, you look at men between the ages of 20 and 24. 1 in 7 of them, they're not in school. They don't have jobs. What are they doing? They're doing nothing. They're doing nothing. And this is a huge social problem. This wasn't a problem when there was jobs to go to that didn't require you to do, 10 years of university, right? We want an economy that works for everybody, not just for people who can afford to go and get an engineering degree. We would love, and this is what tariffs are all about. It's about bringing back the Homer Simpson job. You shouldn't have to have an IQ of 140 to be able to afford to raise a family. You should be able to get a job right out of high school, have kids early, and support a family of 4 on a single income. That's the America that we're fighting for. That's the America that we want to bring back. And that's the America that's been taken from us.
You think back to, the 60s, 70s, when folks went to work every day. And when they came home, they were just too tired. They don't have the energy to go out and do these protests and, throw rocks at cops and stuff.
Because they're working. They're working
Right.
And they're learning and they're being socialized by not just their peers, but by people of higher generations, older people, right? This is the beautiful thing about the workforce, is that young people come into the workforce and they're forced to interact and to socialize and to learn from their elders in a way that's just not happening in schools, right? I mean, you look at the way the schools are organized, they get all these children enrolled in big classes with people their own age, and they're socializing with people their own age. That's not the way it used to work. People used to go into the workforce. They're working with, the gritty guy who's been bulldozing rocks for 40 years. They're going to learn some life lessons. And that's something that's not happening with a lot of these young people today. And part of the reason for that is that the jobs just aren't there. They've all moved to China. They've moved to Mexico. Or people have come here illegally and legally and taken the jobs that, those entry-level jobs. So people, young people are being hurt really on 2 fronts here. It's offshoring and it's mass immigration.
It is. And, more so than, or maybe not more so, but right along with it, these young folks don't have the same work ethic. And I think it's probably because they haven't been taught it. They want to get these remote jobs and stay at home in the AC, and they don't want to get out there and work. And they need to. I agree with you. It needs to go back to the way it used to be.
Well, Brian, nobody wants to work. Nobody wants to work. So one of the things I do in the book is, I take a very historical-based approach because I love history. I think you can learn a lot from history.
Sure,
and one
yeah.
of the things that I thought was hilarious is that there's newspaper clippings from the early 1900s, late 1800s, Great Depression era. These newspaper clippings are saying, young people don't want to work. Why are young people so lazy? You got people in the 1920s saying, young people don't want to work. That's why we have a Great Depression. You got in the 1960s, they're saying, young people don't want to work. That's why there's, that's why things aren't as good as they used to be. Right. And we're saying the same things today. But the difference between now and then is that back then, those young people were forced to work. And more importantly, they had the opportunity to work. Today, a lot of those opportunities don't even exist. So how are they supposed to learn and how are they supposed to toughen up when they can't even get a job?
I don't know if there is a clear-cut answer to that. Reshoring definitely will help with that. The biggest concern of all the people that I've had discussions with in concern to tariffs is not anything that we've discussed for the majority of the topics, but is how it's going to affect their pocketbook, how it's going to affect them personally at home in the near future, not necessarily the long run. They're just simply worried about things being more expensive because that's what the legacy media seems to be feeding them. If President Trump puts in these tariffs, these big box stores, these chain stores are raising their prices to make sure they don't have to pay the tariffs. They're passing it on to the consumer. It's the same old dog and pony show. And then that gets them nervous and scared. Is there a way or anything that we can tell them that will just put their mind at ease and say that's not the way it works? It's not going to happen other than just saying it like that?
Well, I think we have to be realistic and understand that certain products are going to go up in price and certain products are going to go down in price. It depends how they're impacted by the tariffs, right? If America is making a particular product and we can scale up the production, you're not going to see an increase in price. You might even see the price decrease. But if you're buying champagne imported from France and you refuse to buy American wine, then yeah, your champagne is going to go up in price. But something tells me you probably have the money to buy it anyways. So what we need to be doing is we need to be looking at the aggregate, and we need to make decisions that are in the best interests of not just the majority of Americans, but America as a nation. That's what we got to be looking at. And I think we can look to history and we can say, look, President Trump imposed tariffs in his first term back in 2016. Did prices go up? No, prices went down. What about prices now? Prices are going down right now. We're seeing a deflationary period. And that may or may not be related to the tariffs. I think it's too short term to understand exactly what's going on. But all I'm saying is that your short-term prices don't really have a lot to do with these sort of long-run trends. So what we really need to do is, if we want to keep prices low, first of all, we have to have sensible economic policy, which means we need tariffs in the long run to bring those jobs home and reshore our factories. But number two, I mean, we can be looking at just lowering the cost of fuel, letting us, opening up more drilling, lowering the cost of electricity, lowering taxes. All of those things has an effect on your pocketbook. I mean, how beautiful would it be if we just took the tariff revenue and said, okay, no more income tax for anybody earning $100,000? That's on the table.
That would be a great thing. And I think you'll have a lot of support behind that. We've got, in the midst of the tariff talks and the trade wars, as they say, you're talking about reshoring back to the United States. I'm all for it. I want to see these companies come here. And it's not necessarily getting new companies, which I would love, but getting the companies that used to be here to come back. But in the midst of all this, one thing I've been watching, because it's dear to me and several people I know, John Deere, just calling that particular company out by name, they're still packing up and moving out. And I don't understand why. It seems to me that if we're trying to incentivize these companies to come back here, to stay here, what are we doing wrong with a company like that they're still trying to leave, go somewhere else?
Well, I think the tariffs have been piecemeal, and there's been a lot of change, right? This is why I keep saying, and this is, in all of my articles and every interview I do, I say, look, the tariffs have to be high. They got to be high across the board. It's not just enough to impose high tariffs on China. Because if you have high tariffs on China, but you have zero tariffs on India, for example, then India is just China 2.0. And we've seen that. Some of these big tech companies like Apple have said, look, we're going to move out of China, no problem. We're going to move to India. They don't want to come back to America. So the reality is that we need high tariffs, not just on China, but also on India, on Cambodia, all of these other low-cost jurisdictions. Once that's in place, then we're going to see the real reshoring take place. And then on top of that, the tariffs have to be stable. Right now, they're not stable. President Trump instituted, the tariffs across the board on Liberation Day, April 2nd. And then 2 weeks later, they were paused for 90 days to give time for negotiations. Now there's been some piecemeal trade deals coming out. For example, there's a trade deal with the United Kingdom. Earlier this week, there's been talks with China. So we'll probably have a Chinese trade deal coming out soon. But the reality is that these businesses, if they're going to invest in America, they need the tariffs to be stable. They need to know that if they're going to plug $15 billion into building a new steel mill, for example, that they're going to have the protection of tariffs, not just for next year, but at least until the end of President Trump's term, and hopefully long after that. So this is where President Trump needs to get in there with Congress and get a reindustrialization bill passed through Congress. I mean, these tariffs need to be codified. Right now, they're not codified, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's why companies, some companies are, they're just going to try to wait it out.
So the reciprocal tariffs, 10% here, 15%, whatever they're giving us, we're giving right back to them. Is something like that mainly just to bring them to the table, just to talk? And it seems like what they keep doing is they want to bring it to zero tariffs or very low on both sides. Is that advantageous for us?
No, it's a terrible idea. It's a terrible idea. It looks good on paper. It looks good on paper because everybody says, oh, 0% tariffs. It's free trade. That's great. But it's not free trade. And the reason for that is because these foreign jurisdictions don't bake in the price of doing business in America into those other countries. There's something called externalities. And, Peter Navarro, who endorsed my book, he's talked a lot about externalities. You look at the cost of labor and the cost of doing business in China. It's not just that they have cheaper labor. It's also that they have slave labor. They have, you can pollute as much as you want. You don't have to remediate the environment. You can, do all sorts of, horrible things, moral abuses. You can put in, low quality paints and chemicals into your products, whatever it may be. And that brings the cost of the good down. It makes the price cheaper. But we're still paying the costs, to society, to our environment, to our health. And that's why when America makes laws, we make them for a good reason. And what these companies are doing is they're offshoring their production and they're skirting our laws, and they're still taking the profits. But in my view, if you're going to sell your goods in America, you have to play by our rules, which means following the law. And that's going to normalize the price. So what tariffs do is they equalize that price between a foreign jurisdiction who's not following our laws and then a manufacturer who's based at home who is following the laws. That's why we need the tariffs. We've got to balance those out because otherwise it's not fair. 0% and 0% is not fair because of the externalities.
I don't think a lot of people think about those because it's fed to us by the legacy media, the numbers, and that's what we're thinking about. Okay, high tariffs, bad. Low tariffs, good. Free trade, we can trade amongst each other. But the way you've explained it really helps open people's eyes, and I hope that it does. Are there any other myths about tariffs, any important myths that you really want to dispel for the listeners?
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit more about the myth of free trade. So we've talked about those externalities, but what people also have to remember is that these other foreign countries are supporting their industries in ways that are not necessarily have a monetary value. So China, for example, they don't, they prohibit American companies from selling their goods in China, as a matter of law. They don't discriminate just based on price. They also discriminate on a host of other, arcane regulations. And did you bribe the right guy, right? So it's very hard for American goods to sell there. So it's not reciprocal. And even if the tariff rates were equal, it still wouldn't be reciprocal. On top of that, most foreign governments support their industries through, subsidies. They support them with below market loans, preferential land use policies, all sorts of stuff. And what this ends up doing is it makes the cost of producing whatever product they're producing below market value. So even if you had perfect competition between an American private enterprise and a Chinese state-backed corporation, America could never compete on price because the Chinese company is getting like billions and billions of dollars in free loans. What this allows them to do is it allows them to dump their products into America at a below market cost, undercutting our producers at a rate they could never match. They could never, ever, ever match it. And then that kills the American businesses off, or it severely weakens them so that they can't invest in, in new technology or in new labor, whatever it may be. And that atrophies the American businesses. And then, the Chinese do this for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And then what happens is they say, look, the American industry is so weak, we're just going to come in and buy it. Or we'll just flood the market with our goods. And once all the American competition is killed off, then they just jack up the prices anyways. This is how dumping works. And this is why, for example, Nippon Steel recently just purchased U.S. steel. It's because these, Nippon Steel and these other East Asian steel companies are being propped up by the government. They're selling below-cost steel into America. It kills their industry, and then they just buy up their competitors in America. This is happening to every single industry in America. So there's no such thing as free trade. You have free American private enterprise getting destroyed by the Chinese government. How is that free trade?
Well, it certainly doesn't sound free at all.
No, sir. But that's the reality. So when people say they want free trade, what they mean is they want American businesses to get crushed by the Communist Party of China. It doesn't make any sense.
No, we should be crushing them.
I'd love to see it. President Trump is he's the first politician since Ross Perot to even address this issue. And I should say he's the first successful politician in 50 years to move on this issue.
Looking at the tariffs, I went back and I saw a number of presidents prior to, President Trump 2.0 here, who have enacted or altered tariffs in some way, shape, or form. It was never talked about. It was just never a big deal. But now that President Trump has done it, it is at the forefront. It is, orange man bad doing bad things. Simple as that. But it's really opened a lot of us to the tariffs and what they are and how they can help our economy. Your book, Reshore, I think, is a very insightful book. It brings together a lot of real world impacts from losing manufacturing jobs and how the tariffs can help bring those opportunities back to the American communities. It's very timely and important for anyone who cares about the future of our country, and they need to get a copy of this book and read it. It takes a minute. I'm not a lawyer by any means, but this book doesn't necessarily need a lawyer to read it. It's broken down very well.
I appreciate it. I mean, this book really is the blueprint for reindustrializing America. People, if they want to understand how tariffs work and they want to understand what the president is doing and how it is ultimately going to be in everybody's best interests, not just 5 years down the road, but 50 years down the road. That's what this book is talking about. It puts tariffs in their proper historical context. It cuts through all the media BS about tariffs, and it gets to the heart of the matter on how we actually grow the economy and make America rich again.
MARA, M-A-R-A, right? Make America rich again. I'm all about it. Absolutely.
I love it. Wouldn't it be good to be rich again?
Oh, man. I think back to, the simpler times when I talk to folks about how crazy life is nowadays, and think back to, the 60s and the plants and the manufacturing jobs and just the simplicity of life and the cost of things. Cars at $5,000 to $10,000, homes at $15,000 to $20,000, and the amount that it has increased in just my lifetime alone. I'm looking at $60,000 homes that are $200,000 now. People can barely afford to go to college or afford to get out there and buy a home or a decent vehicle because of many different things that come together. And I hope and I pray that these tariffs are one way that we can use to help bring this economic boom back to America and improve the economy and put more money back in Americans' pockets and maybe see some sort of easing on our wallets. I mean, my poor wallet, it screams every single day. And we just got to find a way to fix this,
Amen to that, brother.
Spencer, I really want to thank you for joining us on the Springer Show and sharing your perspective on all these critical issues. They're very important, and it's something that we definitely need to have more discussions about. For all the listeners who want to learn more or get a copy of the book, it can be found on Amazon and calamopress.com. Did I say that right? Calamo?
You got it right, sir. And then people can follow me on X or on my Substack for all the latest articles and analysis at Real SP Morrison.
Real SP Morrison. Yep. And check out nationaleconomicseditorial.com. I am not economically savvy at all, but the website is very intuitive. It breaks things down very well. It gives a lot of good information. So make sure you follow Spencer. Get out there, talk to him. He's a really nice guy, easy to talk to. Spencer, I want to thank you again for your time and for your commitment to reviving the American dream. For all my listeners, I thank you guys for being with us. Spencer, man, you are welcome to come back here and talk to us anytime at all. I really enjoyed having you.
Thanks a lot, Brian. God bless.
Absolutely. Everybody go get a copy of Spencer's book. Check it out. Until next time, stay safe and God bless.